this video, we will talk about how to write about research methods, and the focus will be on how to write the method chapter of a master thesis. But what I will be saying in this video will also be relevant for other kinds of methodological writing, such as writing a methods report for a smaller research project. In order to write a good method chapter, it's important to know a little bit about what the purpose is of a method chapter. A method chapter should describe the research process and the empirical data. So what kind of data have you collected? What kind of research methods have you used? If you've been interviewing people, who have you been interviewing? How many interviews? How did you recruit and sample these interviewees? If you've observed, how did you select observation as a method? Where did you observe? How did you observe, etc. If you've been doing textual analysis, what kind of text, what kind of approach to textual analysis have you used, etc. And because research methods is a lot about making choices, you should also in a method chapter justify the choices you have made. Why did you make the choices that you did? Sometimes several choices could have been possible and could have been relevant and good choices. You had to select one. Why did you choose as the way you did? And because a lot of these choices are often made during the research process, it can be good to make some notes for the method chapter as you work on designing a research project. Then you make a lot of choices as you collect the data, as you analyze the data, to write down why you chose to do the way you did, because then it's easier to remember it and easier to write it into the method chapter. And then a method chapter should not just describe what you did, but also discuss what you did, the challenges you encountered, maybe failures that happened during the research process, things that didn't go the way that you had planned for them to. Maybe you had planned to interview a certain group of people, but you were not able to access them. Maybe you had technical problems that meant that a lot of information from one interview was lost. Maybe you lost your field notes from observation. Maybe things happen, and instead of hiding these failures, include them in the method chapter. Talk about how you dealt with these failures. Talk about what you learned from these failures, and that will make your method chapter much more interesting to read, much more honest, and also you will be able to show what you have learned through the challenges and failures that you might have encountered. And then a method chapter is also the place to discuss the quality of your study and its limitations. One single master thesis or one single small research project cannot answer all questions. And there will always be limitations, things that you cannot say something about based on your data. What are those limitations? When it comes to the quality of your study, what are the weaknesses of your choice of research method, your sample, your data, how you analyze it? Be honest about these weaknesses, so that the reader will know exactly what can you say based on your particular study. A method chapter is written in the past tense because you write this chapter after you have collected and analyzed the data, reflecting back on the choices you made, justifying choices you made in the past, and therefore it is written in the past tense. It's then different from a project description where you will write about research methods in the future tense, where you write about things that you plan to do. But now in the method chapter, you have already done these things, so you write in the past tense. Method chapter is often an easy or a good chapter to, maybe not the first chapter to write. That should probably be the introduction, or at least a first draft for an introduction. Maybe also start writing the theory chapter. But a method chapter is a good chapter to start writing quite early because it has often a quite a standardized structure. It doesn't mean that you have to use this structure for your method chapter, but it's a structure that it's commonly found in a lot of method chapters in master theses and also other kinds of methodological writing. That you start by saying something about the research method you chose, then you say something about sampling, how the data was collected, how you analyze the data. You have a separate section on research ethics where you include the key ethical principles that were relevant for your study. And then you close off by saying something about research quality and limitations. Feel free to use a slightly different structure, but these are some of the points that should be included in a method chapter. I've included also some questions that you can ask when reading other students' method chapter, but that can also be good to ask when reading your own method chapter, to ask yourself, have I included what I should include? And do I give enough detail for the reader to understand exactly what I did during my data collection and analysis? So questions such as, how is the choice of research method justified? Not just say what kind of research method you use, but also say why you decided to use this method. Are the research method and data appropriate for answering the research question? What do we get to know about the sample, and how is the sampling procedure justified? How is the data collected? How does the researcher reflect on challenges encountered in this process? How does the researcher reflect on his or her own positionality and relations in the field? How is the data analyzed? How did the researcher deal with research ethics? And how does the researcher reflect on the strengths and limitations of the research project? So a good method chapter, based on my own experience examining master theses, should not only describe what you did, but also discuss and reflect based on what you did. And a method chapter should also include references to relevant sources from the method's literature. Books, articles, book chapters, other kinds of sources. That should be used when you include a concept. You should a specific concept, talking about a specific form of sampling. You should include a reference to these specific concepts that you're using. When you justify your choices, maybe some of these justifications are based on things you've read in the methods literature, that one particular research method is particularly good for certain kinds of research projects, and then you want to include a reference to that source where you read this. Or when you evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of your data, of the research method you've used, you can also use and refer to methods literature. But a method chapter should not include long descriptions of what qualitative research is, what qualitative interviews are, what observation is, etc., etc. You can say something that you've chosen to do a qualitative research project and give the reasons for why you've done so, but always relate what you're writing to your own specific research project. This is not a written school exam where you are tested on how well you know the differences between qualitative and quantitative research. Always relate what you're including from the methods literature, what you're talking about, to your specific research project. Good luck writing the methods chapter or any other kinds of methods report.